we can, yeah, start whenever you've got some questions.
Excellent. All right. So I just started. Yeah, so I figured, we could start just by, in a very open way, picking your brain on what you view as kind of the causes behind particularly these recent delisting events and how it's been impacting the BSV community and whether you think there are better ways in which it could have been handled.
Sure. To cut to the chase, I think the delisting of BSV by certain exchanges was caused by personal dislike of Craig Wright by certain exchange CEOs. And it's focused on that, as well as his taking steps to enforce legal remedies against people who he believes have libeled or defamed him. And that the steps to delist BSV by some exchanges has nothing to do with any change in technical fundamentals about Bitcoin SV or the objective criteria an exchange should be evaluating to list or delist an asset. So if you look back, it started all with CZ, the CEO from Binance, sending out a tweet saying he essentially did not like the fact that Craig was preparing to send legal demand or notice letters to certain people online who had been making comments which Craig thinks is defamatory. Obviously, there's this whole controversy and issue about whether Craig is Satoshi Nakamoto or not. Some people believe he is, some people believe he's not. And after years of just letting very negative and defamatory comments continue online, Craig decided to say enough's enough. I think this is false and defamatory. That's what led CZ to say, if you don't stop this, I'm going to delist BSV. So that made very clear that Binance's decision had nothing to do with the Bitcoin SV network itself or any technical reasons for delisting of the coin. That it was focused purely on his personal dislike of one key supporter of Bitcoin SV, Craig Wright. That then led also a couple of other exchanges after then, and a couple of days later, CZ announced that Binance was going to delist. So this all happened within a matter of a couple of days, so very sudden. Then ShapeShift and Kraken announced they were going to delist as well. And Jesse Powell, Kraken's situation is very interesting because they've started running a Twitter poll about whether to delist Bitcoin SV. And then
not to interrupt you, but that was one of the other things I was hoping for your perspective on, if you have any views on exchange.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, I absolutely do. We'll get to that. Okay. And then after the Twitter poll was concluded, they announced the people have spoken, we're delisting Bitcoin SV. But then I believe it was just yesterday, Jesse Powell, the CEO of Kraken, issued a couple of tweets acknowledging that the reason for the delisting had nothing to do with the technical merits of Bitcoin SV. In fact, he said he thought, well, Bitcoin SV never met their listing criteria in the first place, which begs the question why they listed it, during the hash war last year anyway, at all. And that his decision was based upon, as he expressed in this tweet, that they did not like the some BSV leaders threatening or taking legal action against their clients and partners. So they've acknowledged pretty openly that the decision to delist Bitcoin SV has nothing to do with the technical or market fundamentals of the coin or the blockchain or the network. It's all focused on, we don't like Craig Wright, we think he is a fraud, and we don't like the fact that he's taking legal actions to enforce his rights. My view of that is a completely ridiculous reason for exchanges or their CEOs to use to list or delist any asset. Exchanges, because they have a fiduciary responsibility to their customers, right, and the protection of their assets, I think exchanges need to be objective and fair because they create marketplaces for assets. They should use formal business processes to evaluate objective criteria about whether to list an asset or not. That's not what happened in this case. It's very clear. And I think it is a sad precedent and commentary on the cryptocurrency industry. which was born through Bitcoin, valuing this concept of decentralization and creation of a electronic cash that was above control by anyone. But here you have exchange CEOs at a whim on a day or two's notice saying, well, we don't like Craig Wright and what he's doing personally, and we are delisting Bitcoin SV. The reason that's sad for the cryptocurrency industry, and I think it sets a very terrible precedent, and people have been saying this online, is that no matter what you think of Craig Wright or Bitcoin SV, exchange CEOs should not be using their personal feelings about an individual backer of any asset to make these decisions. It opens the market up to very easy market manipulation in the future for personal sentiments. Binance, for example, has its own coin, right? The Binance coin, and it's preparing to create this world of tokens on Binance coin. So they have a vested interest on what assets win or don't win. Our position is that there should only be one public blockchain and one coin. So we, I think, threaten a lot of other people. This is not how decisions should be made. Think about how this would happen in the stock market. Should some major stock exchange wake up one day and have its CEO say, I don't like that Jeff Bezos appears to have had an affair with someone other than his wife. I'm going to delist Amazon. I don't like that Elon Musk was smoking marijuana on a television interview. Or that he's seeming a little crazy or taking actions against people I don't like. I'm going to delist Tesla. I think that would never happen in the stock market. And if the cryptocurrency world wants to be taken seriously as a real asset with real institutional investors behind it, then it needs to grow up and not do it this way. Another analogy in the crypto world is, let's take this a step further. For the people cheering for this, this could happen to their favorite coin in an instant. What if tomorrow Vitalik Buterin started doing things against his critics that other exchange CEOs do not like? Should that exchange CEO just overnight be able to delist Ethereum and be nothing wrong with it? This has set a terrible precedent, I believe. I also believe that the exchanges that have done this are going to open themselves up to a lot of regulatory scrutiny. This is exactly a sign of why there needs to be more responsible regulatory oversight of the cryptocurrency market and exchanges. Because in taking out their personal dislike of Craig Wright against Bitcoin SV, these exchanges that delisted, especially the ones that started it, have harmed the value of BSV assets for investors, miners, ventures that are working on BSV, all over the world, including people who have nothing to do with Craig Wright. And I think that's both terrible as a precedent for the industry and highly problematic from a regulatory and legal perspective.
So Jimmy, I'm curious, do you have any views on what the appropriate or correct listing and delisting criteria should be when exchanges are thinking about particular coins?
This is, it's an excellent question. This whole controversy brings that to the forefront because unlike in the stock market, right, there's not a well-established set of regulatory expectations for this. For the most part, cryptocurrency exchanges are using whatever they want. Some of them have published listing criteria, right? But we don't really know how they follow it. And so I think this is a call for regulatory oversight. I'm not as a former lawyer, I believe in responsible regulation. I don't believe in over-regulation. I know a lot of crypto people don't like regulation, but this is an exact reason, as well as, for example, the Quadriga, exchange fiasco in Canada with coins being lost, is the exact reason why we need more responsible regulation. It's kind of like the wild, wild west. There's no organized or a consistent guidelines for how exchanges should be making these listing decisions. And so I think this calls for some regulatory oversight. I think they should be evaluating things such as, for example, the the amount of mining hash that's behind a coin. I think they should be evaluating the number of applications and developments that are working on the coin. I think they should be evaluating, making sure that there's nothing about the coin or its promoters that is trying to mislead consumers, right? There's a number of objective criteria, but I just don't, what those are, I don't think it's my place to say. I, certainly can offer some thoughts about it, but I think this is exactly why regulators need to step in.
Yeah,
and take a look, for example, at Binance. They, when they announced the delisting, they said, here are a list of criteria we evaluate for potential delisting of an asset, including some very subjective things, such as whether, I don't remember the exact wording, but whether the, the project contributes to a healthy cryptocurrency industry, whether there's any, unethical behavior going on. Some of the things are very subjective, particularly that factor about contributing to the health of the cryptocurrency industry. Well, who's to decide that, and what is that supposed to mean? They also did not identify, of the list of 7 or 8 factors they published, which of those Bitcoin SV did not meet. So it's sort of like saying we have all these criteria, but we're not going to tell you or the public or our customers what, which are the ones we based our decision on and why. So I think this is a perfect example for why the industry should be setting some precedent for responsible oversight of objective criteria.
Right, objective criteria, and then it sounds like you're also saying there's some degree of responsibility for explaining when a coin is being delisted, especially which criteria they're not satisfying.
Well, I think it's even more important than the criteria used to do the initial listing, because once you have listed a coin, and then you make a decision to delist it, that caused, as we saw, a significant negative financial impact in the market. Now, do I think that it should bounce back at some point? Yes, because we're going to deliver the fundamentals of Bitcoin SV to improve it, and it will have sustained value, we hope, in the future. But that by making such a sudden delisting decision, right, especially without really explaining the reasons why, in terms of objective criteria, you can negatively impact the value of holdings of investors all over the world. And if it has nothing to do with the fundamentals of the token and the network, then that is a really unfair way to take out your dislike of one person in a way that harms all the worldwide investors. And that is why exchanges need to have oversight, so that their CEOs on a whim cannot make a decision that harms the assets of potentially millions of people around the world.
Right, right. Changing gears just a little bit, Jimmy. So, you made the comparison between crypto and traditional markets. And one thing that happens a decent amount in traditional markets when situations such as this come up, with like Uber or Papa John's or something, is the person who's kind of creating trouble for the asset or the company distances themselves from it in one way or another, right? Whether that's being removed or just being more separate from the project. Do you feel like BSV is in a similar situation with regard to Craig now?
No, I know that's tempting to say, and I was asked in another interview the other day, would we be better off as a BSV community without Craig? And that might be tempting to say initially, but the short answer is no. First of all, Bitcoin SV is far bigger than Craig Wright. There are projects, people, ventures, miners all around the world that work on Bitcoin SV to build it that have nothing to do with Craig. Certainly, he's a key figure in our ecosystem, and of course, he attracts a lot of the attention as the subject of a lot of attack. But even though there may be some, how would I describe it? Some an initial inclination to think we'd be better if Craig distanced himself from the project. He's our big visionary. We would not have as grand of a vision of the potential for Bitcoin SV without Craig Wright. We would not be accomplishing and pushing for a lot of the things we are pushing for and the future potential value of Bitcoin SV without Craig Wright. And so I don't think that this is a situation where we should distance ourselves from Craig Wright just because some CEOs dislike him. And if anything, we've seen some exchanges come forward and say, you know what, I don't particularly like Bitcoin SV and I have my own reservations about Craig Wright, but this is not the reason to make a listing or delisting decision. Because I will say that, you know, when the exchanges listed Bitcoin SV in the middle of and right after the hash war of last November, you know, I already knew a lot of these exchange executives and CEOs did not like Craig Wright and Bitcoin SV, yet they listed the coin, right? So the question of whether to like or dislike Dr. Wright didn't make any difference in the listing back in November, and they've chosen to make it an issue now.
So
on that note, you mentioned the Twitter poll. That's one thing I definitely want to address.
yeah, please.
I think it's absolutely ridiculous that any business, but let alone a cryptocurrency exchange, would use Twitter polls to make a serious business decision like delisting an asset in a way that could harm the value of millions of investors worldwide. Kraken started it with its Twitter poll, and I would have to ask, well, what exactly happened? You launched this Twitter poll and you said that people spoke and that's the basis for the decision, but then its CEO, Jesse Powell, comes out later and says, oh no, the decision that didn't have to do either with technical merits. It clearly didn't have to do with the Twitter poll. It was based on dislike of legal action from Craig Wright and others. So the Twitter poll clearly didn't have anything to do with the decision and probably was done just to provide the sense of cover, right? That the decision wasn't made just by one person. But Twitter polls are, first of all, not even a poll of the exchange's customers. Anyone on Twitter can vote in the poll. People have multiple accounts all the time, especially in the crypto world with anonymous accounts. You can have bots that pay for and buy votes. And the crypto world is divided into many camps. And we are the camp that, you know, because of Craig, has support from some strong people, but then has a lot of people who don't like us. And so you're asking everyone in, let's say, high school to vote on whether to kick out of the school a club of people who are less popular. And so you get mob rule, right? It's like Mean Girls. Hey, you know, the mean girls who have all the popular kids' votes decide whether to kick out the nerds. And that's what happened. Except in movies, what happens all the time, like in Revenge of the Nerds, is the Revenge of the nerds eventually, because they know what they're doing, end up winning. So, you know, I think that's what's happening here. And I think when other exchanges and services started also running Twitter polls to I don't know if they made the decisions or not, you know, to delist, but it was clear they were probably going to delist anyways. And the Twitter polls were just done, you know, probably to provide cover. That's just ridiculous. Do we really want a world where digital assets of people are affected and delisted from trading on a major exchange because of mob rule on a Twitter poll? And this is where I really think regulators around the world are going to have a huge problem with what happened over the past week. I would predict that regulators are going to be scrutinizing that heavily because that's frankly just ridiculous.
Looking to the road ahead for a second, right? I'm just wondering what you see as kind of the roadmap for BSV going forward, and assuming that the community and BSV moves past this, do you have any plans for ways to prevent stuff like this from happening in the future?
Sure. First of all, you know, when one door closes, others open, right? And Jack Liu, from formerly of OK Exchange and most recently of Circle, had told me a few months ago he was leaving his last position at Circle to start building some great things on Bitcoin SV. When this started emerging, he actually accelerated that. He had launched RelayX, which is a super wallet, but then he unveiled that he was planning to launch a BSV-based exchange. It's now launched. He accelerated the launch given the controversy, so it just launched a couple of days ago. It's called Float SV, and I've seen online many users say, I'm closing my account with Kraken, I'm closing my account with Binance, and I'm moving my funds over to Float SV. We've gotten outreach from a number of other exchanges offering to list or support Bitcoin SV in other ways. So I think what will happen is trading volume will just move. The people who are interested in Bitcoin SV will not be trading on Binance or Kraken. In fact, they may be shutting some of their accounts entirely. I've seen from one person who represents a loosely organized group of miners a statement that Binance has lost all their business now, right? So there are going to be repercussions for the exchanges that chose to delist in this matter. So we are confident there will be liquidity and places to trade Bitcoin SV. So that's not going to concern us in the long run. In addition, it highlights, I think, a shift that is going to happen with the role of exchanges in the future. I think currently people in crypto put far too much weight on the need for exchanges. Right now, that's not why Bitcoin was created in the first place, right? But these exchanges sort of grew, and how they got a lot of influence and powers. People wanted to list particularly kind of these new ICO type tokens, and you couldn't run up the value and make money on it by selling it without it getting listed on an exchange. So it gave exchanges this sense of power. And exchanges are mostly used for trading between different types of tokens now, once people have bought, for example, with fiat currency. In the future world we see happening, the number of tokens is going to consolidate significantly because we can't sustain this world of 1,000 different tokens. We believe there's only just going to be one eventually. And so the role of exchanges as this almost casino-like mentality of, oh, how do I make money really quickly by trading one token against the other, I think is going to come to an end within the next couple of years, maybe longer, but it's going to shift. So that's why we are certainly disappointed by the action of exchanges that happened this past week. But long term, we're just going to focus on building the fundamentals of Bitcoin SV, and the role of exchange is going to change. As long as there are on-ramps and off-ramps for fiat and Bitcoin SV, the ecosystem will be fine. So we're focused on building and scaling now. Our lead developer announced a new roadmap for Bitcoin SV just the other day, going to 2 gigabyte blocks earlier than we expected. In July, we have a lot of projects and ventures that are building on Bitcoin SV. We're investing in more. Calvinaire just announced this week a £1 million investment in Centbee, one of the best mobile wallets for Bitcoin SV in South Africa, which recently announced a digital voucher program to make available in 50,000 retail outlets in South Africa the ability to buy Bitcoin SV over retail point of sale with just digital vouchers. An example of why you don't need exchanges in that type of environment. And then we have some exciting investment announcements coming up of some major ventures and projects that are going to be doing things on Bitcoin SV. So that's what we do. We're focused on building. We have never been the camp that tried to do the pump and dump thing that you see with other tokens, right? We've always been consistent in saying we're trying to build a long-term, big-scale blockchain that big enterprises can use that will process millions and ultimately billions of transactions a second. And that is a long, gradual process. It's not the kind of thing where a overnight drop or rise in the price is going to make a huge difference at the end of the day. So we're focused on that, and we think we're trying to win a long game, and this is a bump in the road to a much longer journey.
Jimmy, one of the things I really appreciated when I interviewed you a while back was how honest you were about the divisive nature of the hash war that gave birth to BSV, right? Yes. Especially within the community. So I'm wondering, within the BSV community right now, how are people reacting to everything that's been going on? Mm-hmm. Do they see it as just an outside issue and you'll weather the storm, or are they having issues? Is it as divisive as something like the hash war was?
Well, I certainly within the camp of people who support or working on BSV, this has actually galvanized the community. I've gotten outreach from a number of companies, people online, calls saying, what can I do to help? What can I do to contribute? Can I accelerate what I'm building? Right? And so I see it where people are now, they're saying, you know what? Fine, those people don't like us. It's like, going back to the school analogy. Okay, the cool kids over there don't like us. We're just going to work harder to prove everyone wrong. We're going to get our products out faster. We're going to invest more. So within the camp of the BSV community, certainly I don't think anyone was particularly shocked that this happened, because I think they know that exchanges, some of them just don't like Craig Wright, right? And the fact that he's provocative is not lost on anyone. So it's galvanized us. I find it amusing and somewhat sad as a commentary in the cryptocurrency world to see the reaction from all the other camps, right? There was this initial sort of cheering, right? Kind of like during the hash war, right? It was like, oh yeah, they're going down. This is our chance to get rid of Craig Wright, eventually. He's not going anywhere. BSV is not going anywhere. And if people were really honest and they sat back and looked at the position they took, they should not be cheering for this, because it could happen to their token or their coin at the drop of a hat. And so I think we have galvanized our own community. We are gonna keep working and working harder, knowing that we are battling a lot of forces. So sometimes you can take a lot of hope and community spirit from knowing you may not be the most popular kids in school, but you're gonna be the ones that work harder and smarter.
Oh man, I forgot how much I love your analogies and ways of putting things. I appreciate that. Let me just ask you a little more pointedly, and it's okay if you don't have a comment about this, but I'm just curious. You mentioned the very subjective criterion that Binance mentioned about health of the crypto community being something to think about with listing and delisting coins, right? So in terms of, Craig's recent actions, and especially with like the suit against Peter McCormick being kind of the biggest one that people are talking about, do you have any specific comments on that and whether or not it's warranted, whether it is maybe detrimental to the health of the community, things like that?
First of all, I would say that Craig Wright or any individual's legal actions against another person and enforcement of legal remedies should have absolutely no bearing on the decision to list or delist an asset that Craig Wright or anyone supports. This is his personal efforts to say, you know what, you are spreading defamatory statements about me. Now, does it do people take that as a reflection on Bitcoin SV? Some people do, of course, but you have to separate these two things. What if Vitalik Buterin decided one day, you know what, I don't like people saying bad things about me, and started sending legal demand letters to people and say, stop that, I think that's false and defamatory. And if someone disagreed with that, are they going to justify that to start delisting Ethereum? That's a very horrible precedent and path to start going down. So I think it should have no relationship to the objective criteria for listing, because first of all, I think the factor of whether a project contributes to the healthy cryptocurrency ecosystem is not a factor that should be considered, because who is to say that that's not objective? Who is to make that decision? What does that even mean, right? Secondly, as for the claims Craig is bringing now, he's got every right to assert legal remedies. The people he's asserting them against have every right to defend themselves, and let the court process and the legal process decide. That's for a court of law to decide, not for an exchange or its CEO to decide by a delisting decision.
Sure, that makes sense. I guess the last thing I wanted to...
I get that it's unpopular with some people in the cryptocurrency world, says, oh, people should be able to say what they want on Twitter, online. That's true, but free speech is not unlimited. You cannot, the laws are very clear of all major countries, you cannot defame or libel someone. You cannot incite violence in a crowd, right? You cannot distribute, obscene pornography without limit. There's all kinds of restrictions that are placed on our speech. So I think the crypto world should not just be touting everyone should be able to say what they want. There are lines, and Craig has chosen, after years of not complaining about it, to take a stand. He has every right to do that in his individual capacity, because that's what this is. This is not a company bringing the claims. Bitcoin SV is not an entity. It's not Bitcoin SV doing it. It's Dr. Craig Wright individually against another person. It is a personal dispute. That should play out in the legal system and should not have affected a delisting decision.
Well, and interestingly, it kind of sounds like the more you talk about the various factors at play and everything that's been happening, it seems like a lot of it might have to do with growing pains with how the crypto community relates to things like regulation and seeking legal, right? Whether that's on regulating exchanges or individuals in the community using courts of law to resolve disputes.
That's absolutely right. I think I say it in my speeches all the time about it's time for Bitcoin to grow up and professionalize. And by that, I mean a variety of things, its development process, some of its attitudes, but this is a perfect example. How it deals with disputes. That needs to be more professionalized if we want cryptocurrency to be supported by big institutional investors, right? The institutional community of people like your clients of your company, right? Of SFOX, they want stability. They want an asset class in which they feel like if they bought the asset, they know what they're getting into, and it's not going to be rocked by such fickle decisions like this. It's also important to get the ordinary consumer who may know a little bit about cryptocurrency and Bitcoin to be comfortable using it. You probably talk to people all the time who are like, oh, I think I want to maybe invest or buy some, cryptocurrency, but I'm scared, right? I don't really know what it is. It seems scary. If we want this industry to flourish, we have to create an environment, including with responsible regulatory oversight, that makes consumers and institutional investors feel safe. And this is I think, maybe a watershed moment for the industry to sit down and go, you know what? All right, this is not the way these decisions should be made, because they harm many people if it's done this way.
That's a really helpful perspective. I think that was a good question to close on, but I want to go to something.
It also gives too much power to a few individual people, which was the whole point of Bitcoin being created, to take the kind of power over financial systems and money away from individual gatekeepers. Right. Because Binance has such large trading volume, apparently, its decision captures a lot of attention and can lead to somewhat of a ripple effect. I think that it's stopped now. But then all you need to be is one of the CEOs of one of the top few exchanges, and your opinion carries huge weight in affecting what happens with Bitcoin or any other asset. That's not the world we want to create.
Right. It goes back to what we were talking about in our interview months ago, right? About the power of social influence, especially on social media, and how.
Yeah, that's why we're focused on in Bitcoin SV and just the work right now. Let's work and build a blockchain and a token that has actual real utility at a mass scale, so that the value it has is sustained, not volatile. Because let's be honest, most cryptocurrency value is purely speculative. Right? It's people trying to hopefully get rich and get a Lambo, and I know that because most cryptocurrency really isn't used to the scale to support its any real value. So we need to get out of that, which is this casino game mentality, and move to building assets that get real value from real use. That's what we're trying to do. That's why, while this is dramatic this week, we're taking it in stride, because in the long plan of what we want for Bitcoin SV, we want real usage so that the value it has is not as volatile, it's reliable, it's meaningful, and that's what the whole crypto world should want, not value that can be impacted so easily by the opinions of one or two CEOs of exchanges about one person in an asset camp.
Jimmy, I just want to give you, before we wrap up, the opportunity to say anything else. Is there anything else that you wanted to add on any topic?
No, I think the main final point I'll leave you with is when this all happened, and looking at it now a couple of days later, it's very reminiscent to me of the hash war. Sometimes dramatic events have to happen, which seem negative and bad, but in the life cycle of what we're trying to accomplish for Bitcoin and this whole industry, probably are necessary to bring to the forefront of attention things that need to be addressed in cryptocurrency. With the hash war, it was this whole fight about whether developers should be really experimenting and continuing to change the Bitcoin protocol, or whether we should just keep it stable or not. With this, it is bringing to light just the need for how we deal with exchanges, how we view the volatility and what affects volatility in cryptocurrency prices, to have more adult supervision. And so, dramatic as this was, I think it's probably a necessary step in the maturing process of the entire industry. So if we can play some part in that and turning this into something that benefits everyone, great. And we're going to do it.
I appreciate that, Jimmy. Well, you're always so generous with your thoughts and your time, and that means a lot to us. So just thank you again. Really
No
appreciate
problem. Thanks, reach out if you need anything else.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll let you know as we figure out what we want to do with this. And like I said, we'll run all quotes by you and all of that stuff. So we'll be in touch. But thank you again for doing everything you do. The BSV community, crypto community, are lucky to have you.
Yeah, well, BSV is here to stay, and it's just going to get bigger and better. You can quote me on that. So.
Right on, right on. All right, Jimmy. Well, hey, you have a great night, all right? And thanks again for taking the time to chat with us.
Bye.
All right, bye-bye.